The history of the Moabites begins with one of the most controversial episodes in the book of Genesis. It all started with Lot, the nephew of Abraham, whose life took an unexpected turn after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. These cities, known for their wickedness, had attracted divine judgment, but Lot was spared thanks to Abraham's intercession. After escaping the destruction, Lot found himself in a desperate situation. The book of Genesis, in chapter 19, reveals that Lot, fearing for his life, left the city of Zoar and sought refuge in the mountains with his 2 daughters. Lot and his 2 daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. Lot's daughters, fearing that there would be no more men to continue their lineage, made a drastic decision. Genesis 19:31-32 recounts a revealing dialogue between the sisters. The elder, concerned about the continuity of the family, suggested a controversial plan. One day, the older daughter said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him to preserve our family line through our father." This plan, although morally questionable, was carried out. The daughters got Lot drunk and on consecutive nights slept with him. The result of this act was the birth of 2 sons, Moab and Ben-Ami. Genesis 19:36-38 details the outcome of this situation. So both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. The older daughter had a son, and she named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites. The younger daughter also had a son, and she named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites. Moab, whose name in Hebrew means from the father, became the patriarch of the Moabites. It is fascinating to observe how the decisions and actions of individuals can have such lasting repercussions in history. The birth of Moab, the result of a desperate act, gave rise to an entire nation that would play a significant role in the biblical narrative. The first Moabite settlements were established east of the Dead Sea, in a region of fertile plains and plateaus. This geographical location would be crucial for the development of the Moabite nation and its future conflicts with the Israelites. The book of Numbers in chapter 22 verse 1 gives us a clear idea of this location. Then the Israelites traveled to the plains of Moab and camped along the Jordan across from Jericho. It is important to note that although the Moabites and the Israelites were distinct peoples, they shared a common ancestor in Terah, the father of Abraham. This means that they were technically related peoples. However, this kinship did not prevent tensions from arising between the 2 nations. The initial tensions between the Moabites and the Israelites have their roots in the divine promise made to Abraham. God had promised the land of Canaan to Abraham's descendants, which included the territory where the Moabites had settled. In Genesis 15:18-21, we find the record of this promise. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, "To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites." This divine promise, central to the identity and mission of the Israelites, naturally caused apprehension among the Moabites. The impact of this promise on the relationship between the 2 peoples cannot be underestimated. The Moabites, established in their land, saw the Israelites as a potential threat to their sovereignty and way of life. On the other hand, the Israelites viewed the land of the Moabites as part of the inheritance promised by God. The history of the Moabites reminds us that the origins of conflicts between peoples often go back to distant events in the past. In the case of the Moabites and Israelites, their common roots were not enough to prevent future rivalries. This complex dynamic between related peoples is a recurring theme in the biblical narrative. It is interesting to note that despite the tensions, there were moments of positive interaction between Moabites and Israelites. The story of Ruth, a Moabite who became an ancestor of King David, is an example of this. It demonstrates that even amid national conflicts, personal connections can transcend cultural and political barriers. The book of Ruth, in its first verse, provides a temporal context. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The formation of Moabite identity likely occurred over generations, as the people settled in their territory and developed their own traditions and cultural practices. This process of forming a national identity is common to many ancient and modern peoples. Although the Bible does not provide many details about the early development of Moabite culture, we can infer that they developed a distinct identity over time. The early chapters of Moabite history teach us about the complexity of human and national relations. We see how extraordinary circumstances can give rise to entire nations and how divine promises can shape the course of history for generations. The biblical narrative invites us to reflect on how our actions today can have far-reaching consequences. As the Moabites settled and grew as a nation, the Israelites were undergoing their formative experiences in Egypt. The contrast between these two paths, one people established in their land and another in captivity, would be fundamental to understanding their future encounters and conflicts. The book of Exodus, in its first chapter, verse 7, gives us an idea of the growth of the Israelites in Egypt. The Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them. The origins of Moab and the beginning of its rivalry with Israel set the stage for the events that would follow. As both peoples grew and developed, their paths would inevitably cross, leading to encounters that would shape the history of the entire region. This story invites us to reflect on how the actions of our ancestors can influence our lives today, and how our own decisions can impact future generations. Just as the act of Lot's daughters had repercussions for generations, our choices can also have a reach far beyond what we imagine. As the Moabites settled in their territory, the Israelites began their journey of liberation from Egypt. This historical coincidence would set the stage for future encounters between the two peoples, shaping the geopolitical landscape of the region for generations. The land of Moab was a region of striking geographical contrasts. The prophet Jeremiah, in his book chapter 48, verse 32, offers a poetic description of this landscape. He laments, "I weep for you, vine of Sibmah, more than I weep for Jazer. Your branches spread as far as the sea, they reached as far as the sea of Jazer. The destroyer has fallen on your ripened fruits and your harvest." This imagery evokes a land of abundance, with vineyards stretching to the horizon, symbolizing Moab's fertility and prosperity. The mention of the Sea of Jazer likely refers to a large lake or body of water in the region, highlighting the importance of water resources for Moabite agriculture. The fertile plains of Moab, located east of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea, were ideal for farming and grazing. The mountains to the east provided natural protection and mineral resources. The book of Numbers, chapter 21, verse 11, gives us an idea of Moab's strategic location. They set out from Oboth and camped at Ije-Abarim in the wilderness opposite Moab toward the sunrise. This passage situates Moab in relation to the Israelites' journey, emphasizing its position as a borderland, a meeting point between the wilderness and fertile lands. As the Israelites approached the Promised Land, they inevitably came into contact with the region's peoples, including the Moabites. The initial reaction of the Moabites to the approach of the Israelites was one of intense fear. The book of Numbers, chapter 22, verses 3-4, records, "Moab was terrified because of the people, for they were numerous. Indeed, Moab was filled with dread because of the Israelites. This horde will devour all that is around us, as the ox devours the grass of the field," said Balak son of Zippor, king of Moab at that time. This fear was not unfounded. The Israelites, newly liberated from Egypt and strengthened by their victories against other peoples, posed a real threat to the Moabites. The metaphor of the ox devouring the grass of the field is particularly vivid, evoking images of total destruction and insatiable consumption. Balak, the king of Moab's response to this perceived threat was to seek supernatural help. In the same book of Numbers, chapter 22, verse 6, we read that he sent messengers to Balaam, a recognized prophet, with an unusual request. "Come, please curse these people for me, because they are too powerful for me. Perhaps then I will be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that whoever you bless is blessed, and whoever you curse is cursed." This episode illustrates the belief of the time in the power of prophetic blessings and curses. Balak believed that the word of a prophet could change the course of events, demonstrating the importance of the spiritual dimension in conflicts of that time. The story of Balaam unfolds in an unexpected way, with God intervening to prevent him from cursing Israel. Instead, Balaam ends up pronouncing blessings over the Israelites. One of these blessings, recorded in Numbers chapter 23, verses 9 to 10, is particularly powerful. I see a people who live apart and do not consider themselves one of the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob, or number even a fourth of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and may my end be like theirs. This blessing not only frustrated Balak's plans, but also reaffirmed Israel's special status among the nations, further increasing the tension between Moabites and Israelites. The denial of passage to the Israelites through Moabite territory is another significant point of friction. Although we do not have specific details about this denial by the Moabites in the book of Numbers, it is mentioned in retrospect in the book of Judges, chapter 11, verse 17. Then Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, "Give us permission to go through your country." But the king of Edom would not listen. They sent also to the king of Moab, and he refused. So Israel stayed at Kadesh. This refusal of passage had both practical and symbolic implications. Practically, it forced the Israelites to take a longer and more arduous route. Symbolically, it established the Moabites as an obstacle on Israel's path to the Promised Land, creating resentments that would persist for generations. The episode of Balak and Balaam, although initially appearing to be a victory for Israel, has a complex outcome. Although Balaam could not directly curse Israel, he advises Balak on how to make Israel stumble. This advice leads to a tragic event described in Numbers chapter 25, verses 1 to 3. While Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women, who invited them to the sacrifices to their gods. The people ate and bowed down before these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against them. This incident illustrates the multifaceted nature of the conflict between Moabites and Israelites. It was not just a matter of territory or resources, but also of cultural and religious influence. The worship of Baal of Peor represented a threat to the unique religious identity that the Israelites were forming. As the Israelites prepared to enter the Promised Land, the relationship with Moab became a test of their fidelity to God and His divine instructions. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 3 to 4, establishes a clear policy regarding the Moabites. No Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. For they did not come to meet you with bread and water on your way when you came out of Egypt, and they hired Balaam son of Beor from Pethor in Aram Naharaim to pronounce a curse on you. This prohibition reflects the memory of Moab's past actions against Israel, but also serves as a reminder of the need for Israel to maintain its distinct identity. Moab's geography continued to play a crucial role in future interactions with Israel. Its strategic position east of the Jordan meant that Moab often found itself in the path of expanding empires, such as Assyria and Babylon. This sometimes led to temporary alliances with Israel against common threats. As the Israelites settled in Canaan, the Moabites remained significant neighbors, sometimes allies, sometimes adversaries. The border between the two peoples was more than geographical. It was a cultural, religious, and political boundary that would continue to shape the history of both nations in the centuries to come. This complex relationship between Moab and Israel teaches us valuable lessons about the dynamics of international relations and the lasting impact of historical decisions. The history of neighboring territories and emerging conflicts between Moabites and Israelites reminds us that tensions between peoples often have deep and complex roots, involving not only territorial issues, but also cultural and religious ones. The Moabite culture, although sharing some similarities with that of the Israelites due to their common origin, developed distinct characteristics over time. One of the most notable aspects of this cultural difference was religion. While the Israelites worshipped Yahweh as their only God, the Moabites were polytheistic with Chemosh as their main deity. The book of 1 Kings, chapter 11, verse 7, mentions Chemosh as the abominable god of the Moabites. This characterization, though clearly negative from the Israelite point of view, indicates the central importance of Chemosh in Moabite religion. The worship of Chemosh involved practices that the Israelites considered morally repugnant, including possible human sacrifices in times of crisis. The prophet Jeremiah, in his book, chapter 48, verse 13, makes an interesting comparison between the Moabites' relationship with Chemosh and the Israelites' relationship with Bethel. And Moab will be ashamed of Chemosh, as the house of Israel was ashamed of Bethel, their confidence. This passage suggests that just as the Israelites sometimes placed their trust in idols, such as the golden calf in Bethel, the Moabites trusted in Chemosh. The crucial difference was that, for the Israelites, this trust in idols was seen as an aberration from their true faith, while for the Moabites, it was the center of their religious practice. The social and economic practices of the Moabites also differed from those of the Israelites in several aspects. While the Israelites had detailed laws on purity, diet, and social interactions based on the law of Moses, the Moabites followed customs more aligned with those of other Canaanite peoples. The book of Leviticus, chapter 18, describes various sexual and social practices that were common among the Canaanite peoples, but forbidden to the Israelites. Although we do not have specific records of Moabite practices, it is likely that they aligned more closely with these Canaanite customs than with the Israelite restrictions. Economically, both Moabites and Israelites were primarily agricultural and pastoral societies. However, Moab's geographical location, with access to important trade routes, may have provided additional economic opportunities. The prophet Isaiah, in his book chapter 16, verse 8, refers to the agricultural productivity of Moab, especially its vineyards. The fields of Heshbon wither, along with the vines of Sibmah. The rulers of the nations have trampled down the choicest vines, which once reached Jazer and spread toward the desert. Their shoots spread out and went as far as the sea. This passage suggests that Moab was known for its wine production, a valuable product in ancient trade. The political and military alliances of the Moabites often placed them in opposition to Israel. The book of 2 Kings, chapter 3, describes an alliance between Moab, Ammon, and Edom against Israel. These alliances were fluid and changed according to the political circumstances of the region. Despite the conflicts, there were moments of mutual influence and cultural exchange between Moabites and Israelites. The story of Ruth, mentioned earlier, is a powerful example of how individuals could transcend national and cultural barriers. Ruth, a Moabite, not only integrated into Israelite society, but also became a fundamental part of King David's lineage. The book of Ruth, chapter 1, verse 16, contains Ruth's famous declaration to her mother-in-law Naomi, "Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." This passage illustrates the possibility of cultural and religious assimilation, even in a context of national tensions. The Moabite language, while distinct, was likely very similar to Hebrew, belonging to the group of Western Semitic languages. The Mesha Stele, a Moabite inscription from the 9th century BCE, provides evidence of this linguistic similarity. This linguistic proximity likely facilitated communication and cultural exchange between the two peoples, despite their differences. The Moabite social structure, like that of many ancient Near Eastern societies, was likely hierarchical, with a king at the top, followed by a class of nobles and priests. The book of Numbers, chapter 22, mentions the leaders of Moab, who accompanied the messengers sent to Balaam, suggesting a stratified social structure. Moabite cities, such as Ar and Kir Hareseth, were centers of political and economic power. The prophet Isaiah, in his book, chapter 15, verse 1, mentions these cities in a prophecy about Moab. An oracle concerning Moab: Ar in Moab is ruined, destroyed in a night. Kir in Moab is ruined, destroyed in a night. This passage suggests the importance of these cities in Moabite national identity. In terms of military organization, the Moabites, like many of their neighbors, probably relied on a combination of a standing army and citizen levies in times of war. The book of 2 Kings, chapter 3, describes the king of Moab summoning all men of military age to battle, suggesting a conscription system similar to that of other nations in the region. Moab's position as a buffer state between larger powers significantly influenced its foreign policy and national identity. Often caught between empires like Assyria, Babylon, and Egypt, the Moabites had to carefully navigate the turbulent waters of regional politics to maintain their independence. Despite the differences and conflicts, the geographical proximity and historical ties between Moabites and Israelites created a complex and multifaceted relationship. This relationship was characterized by both antagonism and cooperation, depending on historical circumstances and political interests at the time. Moabite culture, in its distinction from the Israelite culture, offers us a fascinating glimpse into the diversity and complexity of ancient Near Eastern societies. It reminds us that even in a world of frequent conflicts, cultures never exist in total isolation, but are always shaped by their interactions with neighbors, whether they are allies or adversaries. The period of the judges in Israel, which lasted about 300 years after the conquest of Canaan, was marked by repeated cycles of apostasy, oppression, repentance, and deliverance. During this time, relations between Israel and Moab became increasingly tense, with several significant conflicts. One of the most notable episodes of this period involved Eglon, the king of Moab, and the Israelite judge Ehud. The Book of Judges, chapter 3, verses 12 to 14, describes how God strengthened Eglon against Israel due to the people's disobedience. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. Getting the Ammonites and Amalekites to join him, Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. This passage reveals several important aspects of the relationship between Moab and Israel during the period of the Judges. First, it shows that Moab had become a significant regional power, capable of forming alliances and dominating Israel. Second, it illustrates how Israel's fortunes were tied to its faithfulness to God, with Moabite oppression being seen as a consequence of Israelite disobedience. The Moabite occupation lasted 18 years, a considerable period that certainly had a profound impact on the lives of the Israelites. The city of palms, generally identified as Jericho, was a strategic location, suggesting that Moabite control extended significantly into Israelite territory. Israel's liberation came through Ehud, described as a left-handed man from the tribe of Benjamin. The narrative of his mission to assassinate Eglon is rich in detail and strategy. Ehud used his left-handedness to conceal a dagger and gain a private audience with King Eglon. The biblical text does not spare words in describing Eglon, mentioning that he was a very fat man. This description, far from being merely a physical detail, probably serves to contrast the oppressor's opulence with the situation of the oppressed Israelites. Ehud's assassination of Eglon is described vividly and even comically in some aspects. After stabbing the king, Ehud escapes, leaving the king's body in his private chambers. Eglon's servants, respecting the king's privacy, take a long time to discover what happened, giving Ehud enough time to flee and gather the Israelite forces. The result of this daring act was a decisive victory for Israel over Moab. Judges 3:29 reports, "At that time they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong, not one escaped." This victory brought a period of peace that lasted 80 years, one of the longest eras of tranquility mentioned in the Book of Judges. This episode illustrates the cyclical nature of the period of the Judges. Israel would sin, be punished through oppression by neighboring nations, cry out to God, who would then raise a deliverer. After liberation, a period of peace would follow until the cycle repeated. The story of Ehud and Eglon was not the only confrontation between Israel and Moab during the period of the Judges. Although we do not have detailed accounts of other specific conflicts, it is likely that there were ongoing tensions and border skirmishes between the two peoples. Moab's role as an oppressor of Israel in this period is significant because it represents a shift in the regional power dynamic. At the beginning of the conquest of Canaan, Israel was often depicted as the aggressor, taking lands from other peoples. Now we see Moab assuming a dominant position, able to subjugate Israel for a prolonged period. This reversal of roles likely had a profound impact on the collective psyche of both nations. For Moab, it may have represented an opportunity for revenge for previous conflicts and an assertion of its regional power. For Israel, it was a period of humiliation and suffering, seen as a consequence of their unfaithfulness to God. The period of the Judges also saw changes in the social and political structures of both nations. In Israel, the lack of strong central leadership led to a more fragmented tribal system, with judges emerging to lead in times of crisis. Moab, on the other hand, appears to have maintained a more stable monarchy, as evidenced by the long reign of Eglon. Geography continued to play a crucial role in relations between the two peoples. Moab's control of the City of Palms suggests they were able to expand their territory beyond their traditional borders, crossing the Jordan River. This would have given Moab access to important trade routes and additional resources, further increasing its power in the region. Moabite oppression likely affected various aspects of Israelite life. Besides the probable demands for tribute and labor, there may have been attempts to impose Moabite cultural and religious practices on the Israelites. This would have been particularly troubling for Israel's religious leaders, who saw the worship of foreign gods as the root of the nation's problems. The liberation led by Ehud not only ended Moabite domination, but also reaffirmed Israel's national and religious identity. The decisive victory over the Moabite forces served as a powerful reminder of Yahweh's power and the importance of covenant faithfulness. However, it is important to note that, despite the violent nature of these conflicts, relations between Moabites and Israelites were not uniformly hostile. The story of Ruth, which probably occurred during this period, shows that there was room for positive interactions and even integration between the two peoples. The period of the Judges, therefore, represents a time of intensified conflicts between Israel and Moab, but also of complexity in the relations between the two peoples. It was a time of shifting power, challenges to national and religious identity, and continued interaction, sometimes violent, sometimes peaceful, between neighbors whose destinies were closely intertwined. With the end of the period of the Judges, Israel entered the era of kings, beginning with Saul and reaching its peak with David and Solomon. This period brought significant changes in the relations between Israel and Moab, marked by complex diplomacy and intense wars. Saul's reign saw little significant interaction with Moab recorded in the scriptures. However, it was during David's reign that the relations between the two kingdoms became more complex and dynamic. Interestingly, David had familial connections with Moab through his great-grandmother, Ruth the Moabite. This connection led to an intriguing episode early in David's reign. While fleeing from King Saul, David sought refuge for his parents in Moab. The first book of Samuel, chapter 22, verses 3-4, records, "From there, David went to Mizpah in Moab, and said to the king of Moab, 'Please let my father and mother come stay with you until I know what God will do for me.' So he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him as long as David was in the stronghold." This episode suggests that, initially, David maintained friendly relations with Moab, possibly due to his family heritage. The king of Moab seemed receptive to David's request, offering asylum to his parents during a difficult period. However, after David became king of Israel, the dynamics between the two kingdoms changed drastically. The second book of Samuel, chapter 8, verse 2, describes a brutal military campaign by David against Moab. He also defeated the Moabites. He made them lie down on the ground and measured them with a rope. Those who were within 2 rope lengths were put to death, and those within the 3rd rope length were spared. Thus, the Moabites became subject to David and paid tribute to him. This passage reveals a radical shift in David's policy toward Moab. The brutality of the execution method and the imposition of tribute indicate that David was determined to subjugate Moab completely and incorporate it into his growing empire. The reasons for this drastic change in David's policy are not explicitly stated in the Bible. Some scholars speculate that there might have been some unrecorded betrayal or conflict that led to this punitive action. Others suggest it was simply part of David's expansionist policy, aimed at consolidating Israelite control over the region. Regardless of the reasons, the result was that Moab became a vassal state of Israel during David's reign. This marked a significant reversal of the power dynamics that had prevailed during the period of the Judges, when Moab was often the aggressor. The reign of Solomon, David's son, was marked by relative peace and prosperity. There are no specific mentions of conflicts with Moab during this period, suggesting that the status quo established by David was maintained. Solomon's famous harem included Moabite women, as mentioned in 1 Kings 11 verse 1, indicating that there was some level of cultural and diplomatic exchange between the two kingdoms. After Solomon's death, the kingdom of Israel split into two: Israel in the north and Judah in the south. This division significantly weakened Israelite power in the region, creating opportunities for Moab to reassert its independence. King Mesha of Moab, who reigned around 850 BC, is a crucial figure during this period. The famous Mesha Stele, a Moabite inscription discovered in 1868, provides a rare Moabite perspective on the events of this period. In it, Mesha boasts of having freed himself from Israelite control and reconquered lost territories. Mesha's revolt is mentioned in the second book of Kings, chapter 3. After the death of King Ahab of Israel, the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. This rebellion led to a joint military campaign by Israel, Judah, and Edom against Moab. The campaign initially seemed successful, with the allied forces devastating Moabite cities and besieging the capital, Kir-Hareseth. However, the outcome of the battle is ambiguous. The biblical text reports that the king of Moab, in a desperate act, sacrificed his firstborn son on the city walls. This act apparently caused a great wrath against Israel, prompting the Israelites to withdraw and return to their land. This episode illustrates the complexity of the relations between Israel and Moab during this period. Although Israel was militarily superior, Moab was able to maintain its independence through a combination of fierce resistance and, possibly, manipulation of its enemies' religious beliefs. In the following years, relations between Israel, Judah, and Moab remained tense. There were periods of open conflict and periods of uneasy coexistence. The prophet Amos, for example, includes Moab in his prophecies against neighboring nations, suggesting that tensions persisted. As the power of the great empires of Mesopotamia grew, both Israel and Moab found themselves increasingly pressured. In the face of these external threats, they sometimes formed temporary alliances. For example, there is evidence that Moab joined a coalition of Levantine states against Assyria in the 8th century BC. However, these alliances were often fragile and short-lived. When Jerusalem was besieged by the Babylonians in 589 BC, the book of Jeremiah mentions that the Moabites were among those who rejoiced at the city's fall. Thus, the period of the kings saw significant fluctuations in the relations between Israel and Moab. From enemies to reluctant allies, from oppressors to the oppressed, the dynamics between the two kingdoms were complex and constantly changing. This era also saw the development of stronger national identities on both sides, often defined in opposition to one another. After this, the decline of Moab and its eventual disappearance as an independent nation are topics addressed in various biblical prophecies. The prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, in particular, spoke extensively about the fate of Moab. Jeremiah, in chapter 48, offers a lengthy prophecy about Moab. He begins by saying, "Concerning Moab, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says, Woe to Nebo, for it will be ruined. Kiriathaim will be disgraced and captured. The stronghold will be disgraced and shattered." Jeremiah 48. Throughout the chapter, Jeremiah details the reasons for Moab's judgment, including its pride and reliance on its own strength and wealth. He prophesies that Moab will become an object of scorn, that its cities will be destroyed, and that its people will be taken into captivity. However, amidst these words of judgment, Jeremiah also offers a promise of future restoration. In verse 47 he says, "Yet I will restore the fortunes of Moab in days to come, declares the Lord." Here ends the judgment on Moab. This promise of restoration is remarkable, showing that even in his judgment, God still extends mercy. Ezekiel also prophesies against Moab, though more briefly. In chapter 25, verses 8 to 11, he declares God's judgment against Moab for saying that Judah was like all the other nations, thus denying Israel's special status as God's chosen people. These prophecies began to be fulfilled with the Assyrian and Babylonian invasions. Although the Bible does not provide specific details about Moab's fall, we know that the entire region was conquered by these empires. The book of 2 Kings gives us a glimpse of the geopolitical situation of the time. In chapter 24, verse 2, we read, "The Lord sent Babylonian, Aramean, Moabite, and Ammonite raiders against him. He sent them to destroy Judah, in accordance with the word of the Lord proclaimed by his servants the prophets." This verse suggests that at this point, Moab was acting as a vassal of Babylon, participating in the destruction of Judah. This indicates that Moab had already lost its independence and was under the control of greater powers. After the Babylonian exile, when the Jews returned to rebuild Jerusalem, we find mentions of Moabites among those who opposed the reconstruction. In the book of Nehemiah, chapter 4, verse 7, we read, "But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry." Here, the Moabites are not mentioned specifically, but they are probably included among the Ammonites, as the two nations were often grouped together. The last explicit mention of Moabites in the biblical narrative occurs in the book of Ezra, where they are listed among the peoples with whom the Israelites had intermarried. After these things had been done, the leaders came to me and said, "The people of Israel, including the priests and the Levites, have not kept themselves separate from the neighboring peoples with their detestable practices, like those of the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Ammonites, Moabites, Egyptians, and Amorites." This passage suggests that, although Moab as an independent nation may have ceased to exist, people of Moabite descent still lived in the region and interacted with the returned Israelites. After this point, Moab disappears from the biblical narrative. Its final fate, as foretold by the prophets, seems to have been fulfilled. The nation that was once a powerful neighbor and frequent antagonist of Israel ceased to exist as an independent political entity. However, Moab's legacy in the biblical narrative remains significant. Its story serves as a reminder of God's judgment against pride and idolatry, but also of his ultimate mercy, as seen in the promise of restoration in Jeremiah. Additionally, the inclusion of Ruth the Moabite in the lineage of King David and by extension, Jesus Christ, demonstrates that God can use people from all nations to fulfill his purposes. This genealogical connection serves as a precursor to the New Testament message that the gospel is for all nations. The story of Moab, from its controversial beginning to its eventual disappearance, is a testament to God's faithfulness to his word and to the recurring themes of judgment and redemption that permeate the scriptures. As we reflect on Moab's fate, we are reminded of how seriously God treats sin and rebellion, but also of his all-encompassing grace that extends even to those who were once enemies of his people. This narrative challenges us to examine our own lives. Are we, like Moab, relying on our own strength and achievements? Or are we placing our trust in God? The story of Moab also reminds us that nations rise and fall, but the word of God endures forever. The prophecies pronounced against Moab were fulfilled, just as all of God's promises will eventually be fulfilled. If you found this exploration of Moab's biblical history edifying, there is much more to discover in the scriptures. Every nation, every character mentioned in the Bible has a lesson to teach us about God's character and his plan for humanity. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content like this, exploring the rich stories and lessons of the Bible. And if this video touched your heart or expanded your understanding of the scriptures, please share it with others who may be blessed by it. Remember, every time we delve into the Word of God, we gain new perspectives that can transform our lives and deepen our faith. Keep studying, keep seeking, and keep allowing God's Word to shape your understanding and your life. Until the next video, where we will continue our journey through the pages of Scripture, discovering together the eternal truths that God has for us.